All right. Welcome everybody to the final class of this mod for 150 on communications. We've had, I think, a great mod. There have been good articles, good required readings, great discussions on the discussion board, and then some sessions where we've addressed some additional material that if you've been able to review that additional material, I think can help you out a long, and go a long ways towards becoming better at communications within business, but also communication overall. So hopefully you've had a chance to review the sessions as well. Jonna, thank you. This is 4 weeks for Jonna coming to the sessions. Everybody owes her a thank you for not only making the sacrifice to be here, but being here so that it's more interesting conversation for those of you who are listening after the fact. So thanks, Jonna, again for being here. And we'll go ahead and get started unless you have any questions before we get going. Do you want to do questions now, or do you want to do it after we end the recording at the end of class, Jonna? It's up to you. Either way is fine. Sure. One sec.
Hi.
Jonna, you should be able to speak.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I've got your mic on now.
Can you not hear me?
I've got mute on my end though. One second. Just a sec. All right, try again. Let's see if I can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Still can't hear you. So there's something on my side, I think, on my speaker side, where I can't hear you. So you'll just have to type in some questions. I apologize for this evening. If you want to type them in after we start, and I'll get to you as I see them come across, that'd be fine. Or we can wait until after we're done with the class, and then you can type them in at that point. Either way. So let's get started tonight, though, and like I say, Jonna, you can communicate questions either way. So what I wanted to do is tonight give you some feedback on grading through week 3 and how we're doing as a class. I also want to give you some examples of memos for this week's discussion board. Basically, the homework this week for the discussion board is to create a business memo. It gives you, the instructions give you the topic, and you just are supposed to create a brief memo. No big deal. Don't stress out if you've never done a memo before. There are plenty of online examples, and we'll go over some tonight, as well as some pros and cons and do's and don'ts associated with memo writing. Memo, of course, being short for memorandum, and still a way that a lot of business communication takes place, especially official communication. Like, for example, a manager or ownership comes out with a memo regarding a new policy is a very common practice at a workplace, and that new policy is communicated via memo, and that memo's objective is to basically just very briefly communicate the new policy, perhaps the importance of that policy, and that's it. So a lot of times they're very short. In fact, a good memo usually is short. We don't want it to be so long that we lose people's attention, but we'll go over a little bit more detail memos here in just a second. And then I emailed out everybody today, but I just wanted to make sure that to reiterate 2 things. One is don't give up at this point. If you find yourself way behind, not even started on the course, that might feel overwhelming, but if you'll allocate time this week and really effort it, you're still in a situation where you can easily pass the class with sufficient effort this week. And so I hope that you'll be willing to put that effort in and accomplish that. Just a reminder, though, that no work can be accepted after this Saturday at midnight. So I do accept late work, but Saturday at midnight is a hard cutoff from the college. They won't allow me to accept anything after midnight. And so once we get to that point, it's a hard cutoff and the course is done, and you'll have final grades within a few days. So, all right, backing up on this page, as far as the class is concerned at this point, most of you are doing very well. Most of you are passing the class. There are a handful of you that find yourselves behind or just haven't really engaged in the class. That still isn't going to keep you from passing the class if you'll put in the effort, as I mentioned in that email communication that I sent out to everybody. But I would like to thank you, those of you who have been participating on the discussion boards. I think they've been excellent in this class, and I think there's been some very good interaction. Those of you who get your discussion board comments done first, although you open yourselves up to questions and maybe even some constructive criticism from myself or others, the flip side is you also get an opportunity to interact, which is the whole point of the discussion board. Sometimes if we wait till midnight on Wednesday, or if we wait till even later to get that main post in, we don't get responses. And so one of the things for this week, again, similar I think to week 2, that's a requirement, is 3 additional posts, 3 additional responses in addition to the main post. So keep that in mind. It's a little different than other classes where you only put 3 posts total. This particular week is requiring you to have 4 posts total, right? Your main post and then 3 additional responses. Most of you are doing a great job of that anyway, but just as a reminder, that's this week's instruction and this week's requirement for full credit. So let's talk a little bit about memos. Jonna, I don't know if you've already, I can't think offhand, I think you might have already done the homework for this week. You might have already done the discussion board post. If not, this will be a good precursor for that. If you have, bear with us so we can review that information for people who maybe haven't looked at that yet. Good. So I don't know if you've done memos before or created any kind of memorandums for business or for a workplace environment. If you will Google memos or creating memos, you'll get lots of different examples. I would encourage you to use educational sites for your examples of a memo. So I have a few tonight that I wanted to show you briefly, just to give you an idea. And you're welcome, of course, to use these sites. So let me go to my internet browser. Close this out. Okay, so I think one of the best sites out there as far as grammar, as far as APA labs. So as you go through, your Stephen Senegar or Independence University coursework, I think this OWL site, which is the Purdue Writing Lab, okay, as in Purdue, the college Purdue, or the University Purdue. This is an excellent resource for all kinds of different things. When I was getting my MBA, I used it as a resource for APA formatting, but it's also a great resource this week for what we're doing, which is your memo. So just to check, Jonna, are you able to see audience and purpose on the OWL site, the Purdue website right now? Just want to make sure that that my share screen is pulling that up for you. On your end, it might be too small to really read through. That's fine. I'm not meaning to read through this, but I did want to give you a taste of what's available and how easy this could be to do some research on creating memos. If you get a chance, John, let us know if you can see that. I just want to make sure that on the recording that people will be able to see this website. This website is owl.english.purdue.edu. Okay, owl.english.purdue.edu, and then it's got all these topics on the left, different things that you can do. There's all kinds of different writing help and ways to help you with your writing, no matter what you're working on. The first step, though, to writing a memo, as it says here, is defining your audience and purpose. So what are you trying to accomplish with your memo, and who are you trying to accomplish that with? So we're trying to make sure that before we just create this random memo, that we really have thought through what is the purpose and who is the purpose, okay? So if you'll recall, we've talked a lot in this class about effective communication being dependent on who our audience is, and making sure that we always understand who that audience is before we communicate. It was, if I'm not mistaken, the Crucial Conversations piece that talked about alignment. No, it was the Dale Carnegie piece that we talked about last week that talked about alignment. He talks about how if our audience is fish in the sea, we're not going to use our favorite dessert, to catch those fish. We're going to use bait, right? We're going to use what the fish want. So when we're communicating, we need to make sure and align ourselves with the needs and wants of those folks who we're speaking with, and the understanding. And I mean, there's just a lot of elements of knowing our audience that we need to understand before creating a memo. Having said that, this week's kind of vague in the instructions, so just make sure that you for yourself define it before you create this memo, okay? All right, so once we've got the audience and purpose, and this week the instructions kind of define the audience and purpose for us a little bit, but think through that. Then it talks about the different elements of a memo, and this is going to overcomplicate something that's very similar, or excuse me, very simple. We need a heading segment. It tells you how to create that heading segment, who it's to, who it's from, the date, and then the subject. You give an opening segment, a context basically segment, a task segment, a summary segment, discussion segments, closing segments, and any necessary attachments. Now, this is being overly comprehensive here, but some of these can be merged into one, especially if we're only doing a short memo, right? But it does talk through what each part is, and we want to make sure that all those parts are present, even if it means that we combine some of them or briefly discuss some of them. It doesn't have to be as comprehensive as this writing lab makes it out to be, okay? Talks about the format, talks about kind of how much content in each one of those. So a header is very short, only 1/8 of what's there. Opening is fairly short, but more like a quarter. The actual memo itself, right, the bulk of the memo is the summary and discussion segment, about half of it. And then you have a closing segment, any necessary attachments, that's pretty short as well. So that just gives you an idea of what that looks like. And then, of course, like any good writing lab does, we have here the sample. Okay, so here's a sample memo for you. And this sample memo is way too long, as I've mentioned before, way too comprehensive for the needs that we have for this particular class and these particular instructions for the discussion board. But it does give you an idea of how it should flow, what it should look like, that it's professional. It's not a casual, memos are not meant to be casual. They're meant to be professional communication at a workplace, okay? Jonna, can you see the website though? I was just trying to check with you to see if you could see the website so that I could verify that for the recording. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Another site, I'm going to close out of this one here because we've already looked at the Purdue site. Another site that I found, just easy Google search, was a website, called Universal Class. I don't even know exactly what it is. And here we go. How to write an effective business memo. Some helpful hints. Be specific. Use bullets if you need to. Only cover one subject at a time. They should be short and concise, like we talked about. And then it talks about it. Okay. Talks about how to do it, even step by step. How do you accomplish this? Okay. Talks about, it gives some different examples. Okay. Not nearly as formal on these examples as the OWL website, the Purdue website. And I would prefer that you were a little bit more formal than this particular site does, but this site has some good tips on how to do them and some good tips on kind of do's and don'ts of a memo. So I thought that was a a good site as well. That's universalclass.com, and then a article on writing a business memo, an effective business memo. Okay. So here are some of the readings that we had this week. But one of the things that the discussion asked for this week, or the instructions, the required reading, was this: how effective of a communicator are you? Okay. And Jonna, I don't know if you were able to do the quiz this week. I thought the quiz was helpful. I tried to be brutally honest and maybe a little too hard on myself, but I'll show you mine. I could probably go back through and give myself a little bit better scores, but I wanted to make sure that I gave myself room for doing better. I actually scored a 39, so many of you probably did better. In fact, I think some of you have already written on the discussion board, that you scored higher than that. It did identify for me some different ways that I can do better, and some of those ways I'm very aware of and trying to improve. Other things were kind of eye-opening, that maybe I can do a better job. When I was trying to answer those questions honestly, there were definitely some things, some enlightening things that I can do better at. Okay. Thought it was cool that it gives you very specific feedback on different areas, right? Different areas of your communication that maybe you could do better at. One of the things that was kind of a theme for me, and one of the reasons I didn't score as well, I think, is because of my lack of patience when it comes to communicating with people. So I tend to communicate in kind of a brash way, especially at work. I tend to use emails too much. I tend to not think through my emails sometimes if I'm just trying to respond to something and I'm a little bit emotionally charged about an issue. We've kind of talked about in this class, keeping your emotions in check and stress level in check as you communicate is key, because many times you write or say things very differently when you're charged than you should, right? When you can have a chance to get away from a situation or outside of a situation and then communicate. Okay. I know we're supposed to attach the memo for the discussion part. Are we supposed to talk about this test and the other questions? Yes. So whenever the discussion board, Jonna, has a specific assignment, like the PowerPoint, for example, last week, or this week, like the memo, there's usually some peripheral questions and instructions as well, and those should also be part of your main post. Okay, so your main post should include anything that the discussion board is asking for as far as instructions and questions, plus that kind of assignment type element as well. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, just recalling back for you, Jonna, like last week, for example, you do the discussion, you do the PowerPoint, right? You have your notes in the PowerPoint, but then you also talk through some of the issues, associated with observing people and the different communication methods, and pros and cons, good and bad, of communication within your main post. Okay. So once again, Jonna, the discussion board is a place in this class, especially since there are no other assignments, assessments, anything like that. It's the place where you demonstrate to me or show me, it's not showing off, right? It's just, you just need to demonstrate and show that you actually read and reviewed the required readings and read and reviewed anything that we talked about in the live session as well, whether or not you were at the live session or just reviewed the recorded session, right? So it's my way of, instead of saying, hey, did you review the session, or did you review the required readings and required videos, it's my way of being able to say, okay, they did, and they deserve credit, for having done those requirements. If I can't see that you for sure did it, I have to take off some points, because that's the only way in this class that we assess whether or not you did the requirements or not. Okay, good question. Thank you for allowing me to reiterate that, because I think it's something that people get a little bit lax with in a class like this, and maybe they start to skip sessions and things like that, even though it's very clear from the school that the sessions are absolutely mandatory. Not the live session necessarily, but just making sure that you review them and any required material within the instructions as well. All right. Okay, so we've gone over kind of the memo / instructions for this week's discussion board. Just as an aside, and I failed to mention this, but you'll have all your grading done by tomorrow for everything that you've completed to this point, right? So you'll be able to gauge how you're doing with only 1 week left, with only one discussion board left, and a small feedback discussion board. So keep that in mind this week, that there's an extra evaluation feedback discussion board as well. And then you'll probably get the mandatory or the course review. That one, of course, is anonymous. The one that you get that I don't, read any of the feedback on. But the one that you're doing on a discussion board, the evaluation one, of course I do read. And you're welcome to be brutally honest on both. I find that some people are obviously trying to be really nice on the one that I can see, and then they're kind of, sometimes I get some pretty, just once in a while I'll get some really negative feedback on the anonymous one. That's what that anonymous one is for. If you've got some grievance or issue that you don't feel comfortable bringing up to me, that's a great place to do it. If you do feel comfortable though with some constructive criticism, I'd be happy to see that on the evaluation so that I can maybe give you some feedback on, and some follow-up questions or something like that. And it's not just an anonymous thing where I can't really follow up on the why. So it would help me out to do some constructive criticism even on the feedback piece that I get to see. And then of course you get the survey from the school that I don't see. Yeah, the survey is the anonymous one, Jonna, and the career integration quiz is the one that I look at and gives you some feedback. Okay. Make sure you do both. Obviously, the school uses that survey information. That's very helpful to them. The career integration quiz is important as well, but it's also worth some points if I'm not mistaken. I think 15, 20 points of value. So you might as well. It's an easy way to get those points as well. Okay. Stay caught up with your checkpoints. All checkpoints have been graded up to this point. Some of you have been doing a great job with that. Others of you, I think, have life's probably just gotten really busy and complicated. So, that happens. It just puts a little bit more onus on you to make sure that you've completed all the weekly discussions, right, to make up for some of those points. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know why that happens. It's my understanding that every single class should have the survey, but that's maybe there's a little glitch in the system, Jonna, there between you and your husband. He's just lucky. He's a lucky guy. That's right. Well, it's true. All right, so a couple of things I wanted to do as far as feedback on the readings and videos this week, and then I've got a few additional articles and some additional information I wanted to review briefly. My throat is getting dry though, excuse me. All right, so there was an article from Psychology Today, the site Psychology Today, and it talked about how it basically asked the question, if you're kind, okay, if you're a kind colleague, a well-mannered employee, what some of us would think of as somebody who kisses up a lot, whether or not that really means that you'll get promoted and get paid more, or if it's just we're overthinking it. And basically their research would show that somebody who really tries to be cooperative, this is this cooperative versus independent, somebody who tries to be cooperative or is more naturally cooperative, a better team player, they tend to make more money on average and also get promotions better than the person who's more independent. Now, that is not always the case, and not every work environment is that way, but I can, just in reading this, attest to the fact that within many of my workplaces, this has been the case. Somebody who's easy to get along with, somebody who's kind, somebody who is likable, tends to get opportunities, And even if they are being outproduced by somebody who's more independent, but maybe a little prickly, maybe a little cold, somebody who really just sticks their head down and produces and works hard, sometimes those folks don't get as many opportunities, don't get as many shots for promotion and for additional pay, because they're just not as likable, and they're not as fun to work with. They're not as good to work with. Now, there are sales environments where, everybody's out to just produce on their own. They're not really part of a team. And those folks who just kind of stick their head down are really independent self-starters, don't need other people. Those folks can thrive in that environment. So it's not that if you're naturally more independent than you are cooperative, that you're going to be in trouble. You're going to always be held back. But it may take getting to the right culture for you to feel like you're getting, opportunities that you should get. Having been in the insurance and investments industry throughout my career, the last 15 years, a lot of the folks that really thrive within my industry, that's kind of a sales culture, are usually these independent folks. But they're not the kind of people that want to be managers. They're not the kind of people that want promotions. They just want to go and produce and make money based on how they sell or how they produce, right? And go home and not have to worry about a team, right? They're just trying to go out there and produce and provide and meet their own goals. And so those folks, many times in a sales culture, will do quite well. But overall, and this is just kind of across the board as far as this research is concerned, somebody who's a little more cooperative, a little more of a team player, a little less independent, those folks tend to get more opportunities. And like I say, even though I've been in a sales culture, I've been able to see other folks, in team situations, within the bank, within the insurance company I used to work for, that's absolutely true, that they've gotten additional opportunities and doors have been open just because they try to be a team player and try to work hard to impress, people by being a good team player. Now, it has this terminology called competitive altruism, which is interesting, is an interesting term, competitive altruism, because they seem counterintuitive. It seems like an oxymoron, right? That if you're competitive, you wouldn't be altruistic. Altruism has something to do with, being selfless, not being selfish and trying to look out for the good of others. Well, competition usually means that you're trying to be selfish, right? And trying to beat somebody else out. But this whole concept of competitive altruism is interesting. It's basically saying that if a company workplace rewards those who are cooperative, then it creates competitiveness between employees to be the most cooperative. And whoever's being the most cooperative is going to get promotions and raises. Then we're all trying to impress, and we're all trying to be that team player that's impressive, that is going to get those opportunities. And so in a lot of workplaces, the point of this article is that's created naturally. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, yeah, sometimes these are the folks that really bother me, because they seem kind of fake and superficial and not very genuine. They're just trying to impress all the time and trying to kiss up. But at the same time, you need folks like that who are willing to demonstrate, the fact that they're a team player, demonstrate that they're producing, demonstrate that they're following policies and doing what they're supposed to do, and return and report, and are excited to return and report. As you can imagine, managers appreciate that, right? Takes pressure off them. So you're absolutely right, Jonna. That a lot of companies, most companies, you're absolutely right, have teams, have a team approach, and they need, people who are willing and able and good at working one with another in a positive way, right? Being productive with one with another. And so when we in this class have talked about effective communication, many times I've brought up the fact that if you can effectively communicate, you're going to be that good team player, right? You're going to be the person who the team appreciates, because you're having those crucial conversations, you're having those tough conversations, but you're also wise about how you communicate, right? You're not somebody who responds or reacts in anger, or responds or reacts with highly charged emotions. You're somebody who takes time, gets out of the situation, and addresses things in a mature and calm way. People will really appreciate having somebody like that on the team. And I think they'll look at that as a attribute of somebody who could potentially be a leader or manager as well of a team. So it gives you additional opportunities. So that was an interesting article. I think it's always good, Jonna, to see, especially if you are naturally somebody who's more cooperative. It's always good to see that being cooperative does get paid, right? You do get paid to be more cooperative. You do get more opportunities by being cooperative than not. So it's something to think about, something to try to strive for, especially if you're in a team working environment, which most work environments are. You want to be that strong team player, right? That carries your load and also effectively communicates both up to management and to your colleagues the ways that the ways that you're helping the team move forward and progress. Yeah, and that's okay, Jonah. We've talked about how every business needs needs both, right? But it doesn't take away from the importance of you being able to communicate, right, with your colleagues, even if you're in the trenches per se. You're one of these folks that's just going to get down and work and do a good job and work hard. You still could be passed up if you don't reach outside of yourself and communicate and be part of the team as well from a communication standpoint. Yeah, it's true. It takes effort and it takes us getting out of our comfort zone, two things that most of us don't, look for opportunities to do, but we got to get outside of our comfort zone. We've got to communicate and build bridges with folks, even with the folks that you call divas or the people that I would refer to as kind of the kiss ups that just drive you crazy. Got to learn even with them, to communicate with them and be part of the team with them, right? In the end, those folks, they might be the ones that get promoted. We may not, and we may get additional doors opened and additional opportunities because we connected with those folks, right? So even if you're the put your head down and just work hard, it does make sense to create bonds and links and communication and influence with folks who may be the ones that rise up, right? That's right. Yep. All right, so let's move on to the other article. Experience.com had an article about being politically correct, and when I first saw the title of this article, I must admit I expected the article to be critical about being politically correct and how PC our culture is, especially here in the United States. But it was exactly the opposite. It was basically saying, if you want to be a good employee, if you want to be a good uh, promotable person within a workplace, you've got to be careful about how you do things and how you say things, right? So there's a strong argument, and I agree with this, that being PC at the workplace is just so important. Gives you additional opportunities. And so they talk about some different things that we do wrong a lot in the workplace and things that we need to work on in the workplace. And some of the things that it talked about is you've just got to absolutely reject any prejudices or stereotypes. You just have to, because you're going to work probably in a diverse group. If you're not, you will at some point, and you've got to be able to push aside prejudice and stereotypes, or it'll just create a friction that is very difficult to work in. So if you feel like somebody younger can't be a great manager, somebody of a different race can't be a good manager, somebody of a different sex can't be a good manager, somebody of a different sexual orientation can't be a good manager, all those things could prohibit you from improving. It's kind of like what we talk about when we talk, in a church setting about forgiveness, and how, if we're the ones that can't forgive, we're the ones that kind of stagnate, and aren't able to progress and aren't able to be happy, right? If you can't let go and forgive someone. The same is true for prejudices and stereotypes in a workplace. If you can't let go of those and embrace differences, just like you said, you're going to be in trouble. It's going to hold you back. It's going to be a detriment to your ability to excel, to be happy, and to potentially have opportunities going forward. So most of us think we're pretty good about this. I think this is something most of us would rate ourselves very high. And then somebody would bring up one of these prejudices maybe that we have, and we'd say, oh, accept that. I have a problem with somebody who does that, somebody who's loud, somebody who's short, somebody who's fat, somebody who's of a different color, somebody who's different culture and a specific culture that I don't like. Just all of us tend to have a prejudice or two in built in, right? And we've got to work hard to overcome those and reject those, especially when we're trying to work as a team, right? And trying to work with other people. And we need other people to do that for us too, right? Because we're going to have something that somebody stereotypes about us or is prejudiced against us about, and we need them to give us the benefit of the doubt, just like they need us, right? So we do it for each other. One of the other things it talks about on experience.com is how we've got to get out of our comfort zone. This is something we've referred to earlier. We've got to make sure that we're connecting with everyone, not just, clicks and crowds. That will get us at some point in trouble. We've got to connect and be willing to connect with everyone, at least everyone that it's possible to connect with that wherever we work, right? And sometimes that really makes it can be very intimidating to connect with people that you don't know, connect with people that maybe have different jobs or have a job that's over you, that their stewardship is over you. But you absolutely would benefit from connecting with everyone at your workplace. There's a lot of stories of people who lose their jobs and then are immediately placed somewhere else because of somebody that they worked with before, that maybe had left before or left at a different time, but because they connected with them, they were able to help them find the next position that they had. Or, if a manager's in a room with his upper level management, they're trying to decide who to let go. Once again, it goes back to this, are you cooperative? Are you a good team player? Have you connected with the people versus are you independent and kind of just stick your head down and don't, kind of selfish versus selfless? In your workplace. Not that you're not a good employee. In fact, you might outproduce others. But if you haven't connected with people, you might be earlier to go. Let's just say that in a round of layoffs. Something to consider, something to give yourself some job security and insurance. It's not foolproof, but it definitely can help, and it absolutely has, either saved people's jobs or created new jobs for people based on connections. Right? Connections are so important. One of the things that experience.com talks about is that we need to be very PC about the humor that goes on in a workplace. You can get yourself in a heap load of trouble in a quick hurry using humor that's off color, that just demonstrates, that you have bigotry, that could be interpreted as bigotry. Or prejudice. It's one of these things that you've just absolutely got to be careful about. And when in question, just absolutely do not share something that you think is funny that potentially could be offensive to someone, right? Because it only takes offending one person to get you fired, right? Especially in today's world, if you work for especially a large company, okay, and you share something that anybody could be offended by, you risk, getting pushed out because of it. So be very, very careful about that. Probably just get away from sharing things that are off color or anything that could be interpreted as off color or offensive. I know it's fun, but you just got to do that with friends and family potentially, and not with colleagues, because if like I say, if you offend the wrong person and that complaint goes to management over a simple little comment, you could lose your work. You could lose your job. You could lose your career. So be careful on that, on humor. Just use high level of discretion and eliminate most of that could be even borderline. Another suggestion that this article had was to ask a lot of questions. There's a level where you could become annoying potentially, but a lot of that has to do with how you ask your questions. Anybody can become annoying if they ask annoying questions in an annoying way. But if you're asking a lot of questions because you're trying to be inquisitive, you're trying to learn, you're trying to get better, that never gets old. As far as workplace questions that are meant, and the objective is to get better at what you're doing, right? In fact, most people will appreciate that and welcome that. We need to be familiar with people's communication styles. We've talked about that quite a bit in this class, so we won't go into that. And then just respect people and go by the golden rule, which is we treat others how we want to be treated. And there's a step up to that I'm sure you've heard, and a lot of people call it the platinum rule, or a different type, the diamond rule, whatever, where it's that you treat people how they want to be treated, right? Not even just how you want to be treated, but the highest level would be how they want to be treated. So how do we know how somebody really truly wants to be treated? We've got to communicate. Again, we've got to be a good listener. Doesn't mean we're talking, just means that we are effectively communicating, which means that we're getting to a point, Jonna, that I've mentioned a lot of times in this class, which is effective communication gets to understanding. It gets to a point where there's understanding, and then it gets to a point where there can be motivation, change, inspiration, something that helps us adjust or improve, right? That's good, effective communication. So, but there has to be understanding first, and we won't understand really how to help somebody unless we really understand where they're coming from and have that part of the communication go well, right? Then we can align, like we talked about, that Dale Carnegie talks about, making sure that there's alignment with who we're communicating to, how that message is going to be received, because we understand that person, we understand our audience, and we understand what it is that their needs and wants are, and then we're trying to cater what our form of communication and what we communicate, the message, to align up with their needs and wants, right? So not just the golden rule, but beyond that even. I thought the video was fairly effective. I don't know, Jonna, if you got to that video, but it's pretty short, and I thought it did a good job of just demonstrating some things that we all see in other people, but perhaps maybe aren't as honest with ourselves that we might do. So just being lacking enthusiasm, right? Being dry. Sometimes we just do this without even thinking. We just kind of create a very dry message, and the difference between an enthusiastic and confident message and a dry and one that lacks confidence is the difference of being able to have an effective, being an effective communicator, right? Because if the person, once again, isn't motivated to do anything different or inspired or wants to change, or because of how we communicated, then we might have had understanding, but that's just step one, right? We want to get understanding, but then we want to be able to take it to a higher plane where somebody does something different or improves something because of our communication. Yeah, and I think there are some nights, Jonah, where I'm just not on my game. I feel a little bit under the weather. I just had a really long day, or I'm tired, or something like that. So you have to be aware of how you're doing physically in order to make sure that you've got energy, right? And I'm sure there have been times, during this class where you get in a session, we get going, and I just get talking, and I'm trying to share a lot of material, and it's like, man, this is not very interesting for a little while, and he isn't very interesting to listen to for a little bit. And so I have to kind of mix things up, slow down, speed up, pause, ask a question. I have to be careful to do more of that, and that's something I'm working on. So anyway, but yeah, enthusiasm's a big deal when it comes to sales, especially. And notice we all, are in a situation where we are selling something, right? And it doesn't matter if we're in a sales job or not. We're all selling ourselves, right? To future employers, to colleagues, to to our family. We're always selling to people as far as who we are and what we represent. The more enthusiasm we have about what it is that we're trying to communicate, the more confident we sound, and the more effectively we're communicating. So it can be a genuine enthusiasm if we're communicating about something that we're genuinely enthusiastic about, right? Instead of something that's hard to be enthusiastic about and kind of forced. Thanks, John. I appreciate your compliments. So another thing, and this becomes obvious when we're watching somebody else kind of fidget. You probably noticed this last week with the discussion board where we were watching people, right? Where we're people watching. It's interesting how often people fidget and how often it's interpreted as a sign that you lack confidence, okay? Or that you're not being honest. So this is the hard thing. If you fidget, the challenge is that somebody else will interpret that fidgeting 10 different ways, all of which are probably false. All of which are probably detrimental to you communicating your message, though, right? So you fidget and somebody just automatically assumes that that body language means that you're not listening, you're not interested in what they have to say, you are lying. Sometimes people fidget when they lie, or you're not confident about what you're saying. So those four scenarios that I just mentioned right off the top of my head are all detrimental, very detrimental to communicating effectively, right? We need trust, between the people when they're communicating, and fidgeting can destroy it even if it's not intended at all, right? You could be very confident about what you're saying and be fidgeting, and the other person is interpreting that as you lacking confidence. So it can be misconstrued as one of many, there are many different things that it could be construed as, none of which are very positive when we fidget, okay? Something you may have to work at, something you may have to hold your hands together so that you don't fidget. You may have to keep your body relaxed, but really be aware if your movements aren't consistent with an effective communicator. Okay, so I thought that was excellent. I thought the example, watching the person do their hair, move their hair a lot. I just thought, yeah, that's just one of those things that we don't talk about, we don't think about, but subconsciously it does change the message, right? It does change what we're hearing when somebody's fidgeting as they say it, or when somebody's fidgeting as they're trying to listen. Obviously, trying to be concise versus rambling is really important. We all know somebody that we get talking to them, and all of a sudden it just goes off the rails over and over again. They have a really hard time staying focused on what it is that they're telling us. And some of those people are very entertaining to listen to, but it's difficult to get something done and be efficient in a workplace environment if we're not trying to be more efficient about how we communicate. Okay. Sometimes we use a PowerPoint as a crutch. We make the PowerPoint the whole show instead of what we're trying to communicate and say. I think that happens quite a bit in early level, speech classes where you've got, we want to have something for people to look at. We want to have something that's interesting, right? To see some video, something that really gets people excited and feel something. And I absolutely agree that those things are critically important. But sometimes I think that we depend so much on the visual aids that our communication kind of breaks down and we're not as effective as we could be. Distraction words, and I just gave you an example when I said right before I said that, not on purpose. So just one of those things that, when you're listening to somebody, you can hear them really easily, but sometimes when we're speaking, we don't hear them at all. So a few years ago, I was communicating something, I don't remember what, and my youngest daughter, who at the time was probably 8 or 9 years old, was listening to me communicate this message of what I don't even remember what it was, and she was counting how many times I was saying and ah in what I was saying. And it was an incredible amount of ums and ahs in just a 10-minute, 15-minute little presentation. And I can't say that it's made me, good at that. Obviously, if you listen to this and count all the ahs and ums that I have during a presentation like this session, I'm sure there are a lot of them. But even as I've been thinking about it, even as I just read distraction words, I've probably done a better job in the last few seconds, right, the last minute or two, than I did the first 20, 25 minutes of the lecture, because I'm thinking about it, right? And sometimes when we think about it, it becomes even harder to do. It's just something we've got to think about enough to try to eliminate a lot of those ums and ahs and distracting words that really just take up space and actually make it harder for somebody to listen, right? Somebody to be able to get what we're trying to say when they're distracted by all the filler words that we use while we speak. And once again, just like the fidgeting, just like the rambling, just like PowerPoint as a crutch, just like when we lack enthusiasm, all these things can change our message from a very important, meaningful message of inspiration and motivation. And any one of these things can change that kind of message and make it something that lacks understanding and lacks any kind of motivation or inspiration, right? So we have to be careful about all of them and at least consider them periodically so that we do a little bit better job each time and get a little bit better each time we present. just like I'm doing the last 2 minutes, not using ums and ahs. And now I'm done with that bullet point, so I'm sure I'll get back to ums and ahs here in a little bit as I try to get through the material. So anyway, Jonna, the other thing is sometimes we lack focus, and this one we've talked about before, but it's just the focus when you're talking to somebody or listening to somebody, that your eyes have focus, your body has focus. It's these nonverbal things. It's not focus in our message necessarily that this video was talking about, but actual focus of our attention, right? And we all know that a good listener has that focus, but sometimes we forget that a good communicator also has that focus, right? There's eye contact. We're not looking down the whole time. We're not looking off to the side. That can communicate to somebody that we don't have enthusiasm, we don't have confidence, we're not trustworthy. It can communicate a lot of things that we don't want to communicate through our lack of focus. So anyway, the YouTube video was pretty short. It focused on things that we should avoid that are negative. And I think it's a great exercise to go through those and make sure that we are trying to avoid them the best we can, and knowing that none of us are perfect at all these, but we can always do a little bit better. All right, one of the authors that is a phenomenal communications author. So we talked about some communications authors last week. We talked about Stephen R. Covey. We talked about the Crucial Conversations authors. There's about 5 authors of that book, but Crucial Conversations, the topic Crucial Conversations, and the book Crucial Conversations, just a great communication tool. We also talked last week about Dale Carnegie and about how to win friends and influence people. Basically a whole book about how to communicate with people, especially in the workplace, but more importantly, how to connect. We're talking about making connections, having influence, having understanding, like we've been talking about as a theme throughout the entire course. And Maxwell, I think maybe better than anybody else, communicates the definition of why we're trying to connect. The reason we're trying to connect with people through communication is so that we can identify and relate to them. And the reason we want to identify and relate to them and connect with them is to increase our influence. Now, this sounds kind of self-serving, right? Kind of selfish, that we're trying to manipulate people into connecting with them so that we can have influence over them. But reality is, if we want to get anything done, if we want to motivate anybody in our lives, family, friends, colleagues, we have to connect, right? If they don't like us, it's very difficult to inspire them or motivate them to do something, right? To change, to improve, to work harder, to whatever it is that we need them to do. It's very difficult to inspire that if we can't connect. So before you get turned off by, like I sometimes do, about kind of, this doesn't seem as genuine, right? We're trying to manipulate people. We're trying to connect with them just so we can exert influence. But reality is, unless we try to connect with people, we're not going to be in a situation where we can have influence. And if we can't have influence, we're never going to be in a situation where we can effectively communicate or provide leadership or management for anybody else. Okay? And even if we're not a manager per se or an owner of a company, exerting some leadership, even as an employee of a company, is just so helpful to that company. And having influence on others to do a good job, to work hard, to take pride in what they do, those kinds of things you can have influence on other people to do, even if you're just the lowest on the totem pole as far as employees are concerned. But it takes connection. It takes connections. It takes connecting. And sometimes we're very good at this even without trying. There are people who naturally connect with people without even putting much effort into it. And then there are those people like me, I think I fall into this category, where I have to try. I have to work at it. Naturally, I'm somebody who would, not really care to make a lot of connections if I wasn't forced to, or if I didn't try to. But I've got to kind of overcome that natural tendency to not want to connect and make sure and get out there, sometimes get out of my comfort zone and try to connect with people, try to identify and relate to increase my influence, not because I want power, but because influence can be a significant cause for good, a thrust for good, right? Whether it's in the workplace, in my family, with people that I love and care about, friends and family, other people. Influence just has such an extreme, we all want influence in the end. Some of us are willing to effort that influence with others, and some of us aren't. The more we effort that, more we connect, like I say, the more power we have to help somebody improve, to help somebody change, to inspire somebody, and motivate somebody. So what is leadership? Leadership is being able to influence. And like I say, it doesn't take being in a managerial role or a leadership role, as we'd call it, in a workplace environment to really exert leadership on other people or influence on other people. It just takes connecting. It just takes caring. It takes identifying and relating, like we talked about. It takes that that quote that I shared with you early on in the class about how people don't care what you know until they know that you care, right? And so we need to make sure that people feel like we're out for their best interests, right? We're trying to relate to them before we try to exert some kind of influence. The order's we don't want to reverse that order, because then we get into a situation where we have managers and employees where managers are trying to exert influence and kind of rule of law on people who don't want to follow them because there's no connection, there's no respect. If they work a little bit harder on the connection and respect, they'll get people who are more than willing, happy to follow and happy to work hard for them. But they got to work a lot harder on that connection influence in a genuine way, right? Not in a fake way like we've talked about before, but in a genuine way. The fake way where you just try to play the political card like a politician and just try to be nice to everybody and try to act nice and try to act empathetic when you really don't care, people are able to see through that pretty quick, and it hurts more than it helps when that happens. So Maxwell talks about how when we have connection and influence in our communication, then we can have people understand principles and change practices, okay, or start practices. And this goes back to what we've talked about over and over again as a theme in a class like this, and that is, why are we communicating? Why do we even care if we have effective communication? Because we're trying to get to a point where we have understanding, and then even beyond understanding, get to a point where we have influence, in Maxwell's words, where we can influence practices. Some behavior is improved, changed, stopped, started, something. Effective communication brings change of some kind. And so Maxwell, in his words, we're able to get understanding, or we're able to understand the principles, and then we're also able to influence the practices. Okay? So effective communication should be able to have influence on what people do and how people do it. Okay? And just leave you with the same quotes that I shared with you a few weeks ago, I think. So we're at the end of a course on effective communication. You're going to have other courses all throughout your college career, hopefully, Jonna, that really talk about how it is that we can effectively communicate, because the bottom line is there's not a workplace environment anywhere, and I don't care if you're a night guard that doesn't even talk to anybody all night long. You had to get that job, right? You had to interview to get that job. You had to communicate on paper effectively to some degree, or you weren't even going to get that job. Then you had to effectively communicate to interview with somebody, and maybe multiple interviews. And then if you're just sitting there all through the night, every night, maybe there's a low level of communication, but at some point, if something happens, you're going to want, in a high stress environment, to be able to communicate your intentions for that person, right, too. Just in the example of a night guard, trying to stop somebody from trespassing, trying to stop somebody from doing something that you don't want them to do as a night guard, right? So you give me any example of any kind of career, and I'll give you examples of when in the process you may need to use communication and be effective at communicating. But even if you say, you know what, Dave, I'm not gonna use this. I'm not gonna work anywhere that I have to communicate with anybody. I'm not ever gonna have to do any of this stuff. My response to that would be that communication is in the bedrock of everything we do. And so even if you try to avoid it, at some point you'll have relationships with family members of some kind, whether or not they're your children, your siblings, your parents, loved ones, friends. Even if it's not colleagues, managers, owners, right, within our career, you're going to have situations in life where you need to communicate. And sometimes in a high stress situation, you're going to be faced with an opportunity to effectively communicate, or the opposite, which is sometimes can lead to just really devastating results, right? If we can't effectively communicate what it is that we're trying to say, have understanding, and then move on. So If you decide to be a hermit, you can learn to effectively communicate. You can have better conversations. That's right. So even if you're not ever going to talk with anybody, interact with anybody, there's still self-talk, right? Jonna, we've talked a little bit about that. I don't know how much we've really gone down that road in this class, but somebody like Tony Robbins, right, who writes a lot of self-motivation, self-improvement books. So Tony Robbins, one of the main messages that he talks about over and over and over again, and whether or not you like him or not, or his style or not, doesn't really matter, because he's a highly effective communicator, right? Whether or not you like him or not. He's very, he's made millions of dollars because of how effective he is in communications. But the point is, the reason I bring him up is because his books, his messages are very focused on self-talk, right? How we communicate to ourselves, and how we communicate to ourselves really does determine so much of what happens in our lives, and how life turns out for us. Our happiness has to do with self-talk, right? Not our circumstance, but how we talk to ourselves and how we communicate with ourselves. Anyway, there's a lot more to that takes more time than we have tonight. Sounds like, Jonna, that's something you've already thought about, even if you kind of said it tongue-in-cheek about a hermit. But the bottom line is, communication is just a bedrock of so much of our lives, that if we can get a little better at it, right? Even just small improvements hopefully from a class like this, where you take a tip or two. There have been a lot of different things we've talked about as far as tips, do's, don'ts. But even if you just take one thing and just improve a little bit, I think it'll change your life. I think it'll help your life. And so I'm grateful to have participated in a class like this with you. Thanks, Jonna, again for participating in the sessions. Have a great wrap up for the class. If you need anything, let me know. Email me, call me, whatever's good. But I hope you have a strong finish to the class. I hope all of you who are listening and reviewing this later have a great finish to the class and a successful college career to get the degree that you're looking for. Have a great night, and good luck with everything. All right, Jonna, I'm just going to stop the recording.